Hello and welcome to your go-to Detroit Pistons podcast, the Pistons Pulse, co-hosted by me, Bryce Simon of Motor City Hoops, a former D1 hooper and current teacher, husband, and father of 3 amazing kids.
And I'm Omari Sankofa, the second Pistons beat writer for the Detroit Free Press.
And no shameless plugs of our work today, as we are joined by a very special first-time guest, senior NBA writer for ESPN, the best third of the Hoop Collective podcast, one of my favorite podcasts, and somebody that worked through some technical difficulties with us here at the start of the pod. Those of you that were with us for the 3.5 minutes of the first take know what I'm talking about here. Thank you for joining us and working with us, Mr. Tim Bontemps.
Well, first of all, it was very nice of you guys to have me. And as I said the first time, I appreciate your professional intro, which we generally do not have, even though we tape ours and can fix it. And because we tape ours and can fix it, I can tell you that there is basically some kind of 10 to 15 minute delay on every single pod for a tech snafu. So I certainly was not worried about hanging out for a couple of minutes. So no big deal.
Yeah, you have the honor of being the first guest to have any sort of tech issue. Man, well,
it must be a Hoop Collective thing. It must be a Hoop Collective thing because my co-hosts both can't ever get technology to work. So it ends up being a running gag on the pod as we get started every time.
So I won't tell the story, but I will say, former beat writer Rod Beard went through a technical issue with me early on in my podcasting days that I will always remember and really appreciate. But we don't have time for that story right now. I will just get us right into it. We want to be precious of your time. We know you have to record another pod tonight, the Hoop Collective, which I will listen to in the morning as I am working out. I really, truly enjoy that podcast that you guys do. Tim, obviously, the Pistons are off to a great start. I want to start here, though. Let's go back to the offseason. The Malik Beasley stuff, all of that completely changed what Trajan had to do. We've come so far from 2 years ago where it was before Trajan Langdon and JB Bickerstaff. Maybe speak a little bit about what they did last year moving forward, and then what your expectations were coming into this year, whether they would build on it, stay status quo, or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, not to this might sound minimizing of the job that Trajan has done with the team, but I didn't think that there was any sort of really dramatic moves that he made last summer, other than it was just very intentional, clearly from the beginning, that they set out to put a functioning environment around Cade Cunningham and give him the opportunity to see what he could do with spacing and shooting around him, right? Like getting Tobias Harris, getting Malik Beasley. None of these were not like earth-shattering moves. They got Ron Holland in the draft, who's an interesting prospect. But again, it's not like he came in and was like some of these rookies this year, right? He's a sort of a long-term developmental guy that's growing into an interesting wing player. But they gave Cade a environment to excel in, and he took a huge step forward, which is the most important thing that happened. And they had a bunch of these young guys get, between Asar Thompson when he got back from obviously the blood clot issue, Jalen Duren getting a chance to play and grow, Isaiah Stewart playing well. Like, you run through the list of these guys, and all of a sudden, you get in the playoffs, you get the 6th seed, you have a competitive series with the Knicks, and it's a massive success compared to where things were the year before, right? I think 30 plus win jump from year to year, which is incredible. And then coming into this season, like, to be totally candid, I thought the Pistons were going to have a nice year, but I also thought it was smart that Trajan and the Pistons front office didn't go crazy after the success of last year and was like, all right, pretty clearly to me at least, was like, let's replace Malik Beasley with Duncan Robinson to keep the shooting and spacing, but we don't need to rush out and make trades to get better. We don't need to rush out and make signings. Getting Karis LeVert, another guy who could score a little bit when he's healthy, obviously helps too, but it felt to me like it was a bit of a consolidation year, which doesn't mean they were necessarily going to get worse, but that it was like, all right, we're not going to get in the way of Jalen Duren and Asar Thompson and Ron Holland and Cade Cunningham taking another step, and we get Jaden Ivey back. Let's see what he can look like when he's on the court, right? So I thought they were going to be probably a top 6 team in the East, maybe 7th, maybe 4th or 5th. I did not have them at 14-2. I don't think anybody had them at 14-2. But, it's been awesome to see Jalen Duren take a big step and Cade take another step, and, just to have this group build on the success they had last year, and even on top of that, win some games without those guys and have Dennis Jenkins and some of these other ancillary pieces step up and make plays. I mean, it's been a really fun start to the year and a really cool story. And, like we talked about briefly on the first run at this, it's unbelievable to see where this team is, even if this, I think we can all agree they're not a 65-win team. Like, they're probably not going to stay on this kind of pace all season. It's unbelievable to see where this is at now compared to where it was right now 2 years ago when they didn't win a second game until the end of December or the beginning of January. I remember the specific date, but it was way into the season that they won their second game or their third game. And this year they've got as many wins as they did that whole season, and we're not to Thanksgiving yet.
Tim, I caught you in Philly a couple of weeks ago, and that I feel like that game was sort of the epitome of everything that's got to make this Pistons team what they've been. Through the first 16 games, Cade, rough first half, came alive in the second half, obviously clinched the game with that poster dunk, but just the shot making on display, and I'm pretty sure he's still like the leading fourth quarter scorer. Maybe that changed after Milwaukee, but you saw everything he's done this season. You saw Jalen Duren playing his kind of graceful bully ball and dunking everything under the rim, taking guys off the dribble here and there. Sarr, I thought he was really strong on both ends. You talk about the growth of those guys and how the front office just wanted to support that, but just how much has it impressed you to see what those guys have become, where obviously this was going to be more of a long-term rebuild, but you never really know how guys are going to pan out until they get to the point they're at now.
Yeah, I mean, look, Cade has been fantastic, right? I think, like I said on the pod a bit ago, you can make an argument he's as good as anybody this side of Giannis in the East. I think to definitively be the guy that's this side of Giannis in the East, he's got to become a much more efficient player. Like, he's a 6'8" monster. Like, he can't be shooting 29% from three. He's got to be shooting more than 44% from the field. Again, these are nitpicking things, but we're talking about like becoming a top 5 to 10 player instead of a guy that's like 8 to 20-ish probably, right? Like, these are the kind of things that you've got to do on the margins. But Cade is the size of Luka and is a very good passer and is a very good team defender. Like, he's not a guy that's a negative on that end of the court like a lot of guys are that are that heavy usage guys. And also, to be totally fair to Cade, he's played a lot of this season without any sort of other ball handler on the court of reliability. So naturally, with the kind of load he's had to take, like in that Washington game when he shot 7,000 times, that's going to change a little bit when there's more scoring punch around him, right? So some of that I think will help. Duren taking this kind of step forward has been both really interesting and massive. Like, to have a guy go from being a 13 and 10-ish kind of guy to one that's a 20 and 10 kind of guy is obviously really important. And like you said, Omari, like, the thing that impresses me about Jalen, despite how young he is that when you watch him play, he reminds me of Steven Adams and how guys bounce off him inside. He is such a physical guy and such a rugged guy inside that it is just really difficult for a lot of teams to handle him. And it's a big part of what this kind of formed this identity the Pistons have, right? It's Cade scoring, and then it's Jalen taking these steps forward defensively, and then Isaiah Stewart coming in off the bench and giving you 48 minutes of really good interior defense to kind of build on it at the other end. And then obviously, Asar is a really, really interesting player. I didn't really know anything about him and his brother. Now I'll be the first to say that I was not really studying the overtime elite teams. Yeah. Like I know you do, Bryce, the pods with Vicini, and like they're like Jonathan Gavoni and Jeremy Wu now, like you guys like live in the draft space. I try to spend time in it, so I'm aware of guys, but I don't pretend to be an expert on that stuff. I leave that to the people who are doing it year round. But certainly those guys are both super athletic, really interesting pieces. And, he's quickly become an excellent defensive player and a guy who is great in transition. And I think is a really natural fit with where this team is going. Obviously, I don't need to tell you guys the question with him going forward about just what his ceiling is he's still a sub 50% three-point free throw shooter. He's a 30% three-point shooter. In today's NBA, like, you've got to be able to make strides from there to be, a real big impact player, I would say. But we've seen Amen do that in Houston and make steps forward. And I think, especially given the amount of time Asar missed with the blood clotting stuff, I would like to think that as he gets more time and more rhythm on the court, and obviously those guys both work a ton. So I certainly feel confident that he can improve there. And then Ron Holland's a really interesting young guy that's getting a chance to play a lot and has made some impressive strides as an overall prospect too. So, that I think has been the thing that's been most fun about watching this team is it's not like this is a bunch of vets that, have kind of been thrown together and have gotten off to a hot start. This is a team with a bunch of young homegrown guys that you're watching kind of grow up in real time, and you're seeing be the drivers of a lot of the success. And that, I think, if you're a Pistons fan, should give you a lot of excitement that we're looking at a window of, the next 4 or 5 or 6 years where, in theory, this team should be right in the mix in the East, because that core group of 4 guys, like Cade's 24?
24.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And he's the oldest one of those guys. So that's a really fun nucleus to continue to build around going forward with, whatever else Trajan Langdon and the rest of the Pistons front office chooses to do.
Omari, just to your point, Cade is number 1 in the NBA in fourth quarter points per game on crazy efficiency. Tyrese Maxey is actually number 1 in total points in the fourth quarter.
Yes, Tyrese is number 1 in like every total number.
Yeah. He plays a lot of minutes.
He plays a lot of minutes. He puts up a lot of stats. He's had a heck of a year too.
Yes, he has. And I do want to talk big picture where Cade is at, the Pistons in general, some of that stuff eventually. And Omari may have some other questions about specific players, and I might as well. But I do want to pause just a second. You mentioned Trajan Langdon and how he's built the roster. We just went through the roster and the improvements and the growth of all these people. But the players, what about JB Bickerstaff right now, Bontemps? Like, I would be hard-pressed to believe, Dagnall obviously has an argument. Darko's done a great job in Toronto. But I thought JB had an argument for Coach of the Year last year, and I think as things sit on Sunday, November 23rd, he has a heck of an argument for Coach of the Year right now in the NBA. Just what are your thoughts on what he's done, completely changing the culture of a team that had just won 14 games? I don't think we can forget that there is a culture aspect to what they've done over the last season and 16 games.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, look, obviously the Pistons have won. The Pistons are 14-2. I would say that it's very hard to argue that JB isn't one of the front runners for Coach of the Year. But I would also say there's several guys that can win Coach of the Year every year. It's an award that you could give a lot of people. Eric Spoelstra's never won Coach of the Year. I think you could really argue he could win it this year. They've done a phenomenal job instituting this new, fast-paced, no pick and roll, high leverage offense, and they've had Tyler Hero not play at all. That Bam Adebayo missed a lot of time. Like you said, Darko Rajakovic has done a great job in Toronto, though I think they might be losing to Brooklyn tonight. Now they're up 5 with 3 minutes to go. And as you mentioned, Mark Daigneault's coaching a team that could win 75 games. So there are a lot of candidates, but that's to say JB's done a terrific job. And I think I really liked the hire when he got hired by Detroit right off getting let go by Cleveland, because it was a very similar setup to the one he took over in Cleveland, which was you had this young nucleus that needed to learn how to get tougher and play defense and build a foundation, right? And look, we'll see long-term if JB improves on the things that ended up being issues later on in his tenure in Cleveland. But I would say because of how he likes to coach and sort of his background and his dad, Bernie, and JB's obviously a defense first, play physical guy, right? This team is perfect for the way JB wants to play. Jalen Duren is a physical monster inside. Asar Thompson is probably your power forward. He's not 6'10", but he is a beast of a physical guy. Cade Cunningham, again, is the size of Luka Doncic as your point guard. He's a big physical guy. They're just big all across the board. And he, I think, has really helped create an identity for them of being physical and imposing and leaning into that at both ends of the court. And, it's in an Eastern Conference where it is so fluid and so wide open right now. I think the thing that has really helped Detroit early on, and again, they're not going to be on a 90% pace all season, but what's clear when you watch the Pistons is they know who they are, right? They have a very clear identity. They know how they want to play. They know what they want to get to. They're very comfortable in that. And especially with how fluid a lot of the league is, knowing who you are and knowing what you're trying to do on a daily basis, it sounds very simple, but there's not a lot of teams that have that, especially right now. And I think it's a big part of why this team is off to such a great start. And I think, to your point, Bryce, he does deserve a ton of credit because, when they hired Monty Williams a couple of years ago, I was like, oh, look, Pistons got Monty Williams. This is great. And that, obviously, we don't need to relitigate why that was such a disaster, but that couldn't have gone worse. And to come off of that and get JB and have him come in and connect with the guys the way he has. And I think the biggest thing is the improvement he's gotten out of Jalen Duren and really has turned him into an impact player as opposed to a interesting physical specimen, which is what he was the first couple of years he was in the league. I think has been the biggest part of what's really led to this improvement beyond obviously getting shooting and space for Cade to operate in. And yeah, he's done a phenomenal job and has been a great fit. And as somebody who's known him for a while and, been around the Cavs a bunch the last few years, I'm really happy for him that he's landed in this situation and has got a team that I think, like I said, is perfectly suited to his personality and how he wants to coach. And obviously, I think you guys would agree it's a prototypical Detroit Pistons team for the past 50 years. Detroit is a blue collar, hardworking, tough city. And the Pistons, this group of Pistons is tailor made to play right into everything that fan base has been used to for a long time.
Let's kind of talk about the sustainability of this. Like you said, they're 14-2. Are you going to push 65, 70 wins? That's
no
bar that
no,
a lot of really good teams have not hit, right?
They're not going to do that. They're not the Thunder. And again, that is not, to be clear, that is to fans watching or listening. That is no criticism of the Pistons. They've had a phenomenal run to start the year. They've also been very lucky in some of these games. They've won some of these games with all these guys out. It's probably not a reliable thing to keep happening. For example, if I don't remember who was guarding, might have been Bub Carrington, just decided not to guard Dennis Jenkins in the corner in that game against the Wizards. They lose to the Wizards, and yes, they had a bunch of guys out, but they had Cade Cunningham and some of their other guys playing, and they almost lost, I believe that was a home game, right, to the Wizards. Yeah. So, that's just a reminder that these guys are going to win in the 50s. I think there's a very good chance they're the number one seed in the East because they are young, relatively healthy, and a lot of these other East teams are very uncertain and very injured and banged up and sort of trying to find their way right now. But yeah, I don't think they're going to keep up with the Thunder on a 65 win pace this season. If they do, that's going to be one of the most shocking seasons, I would say, in the history of the league if they wind up with, 65 or more wins. There's only, I think, 25 or so teams that have ever done that. And I think even the biggest Pistons fan out there would say this is not one of the 20 or 25 best teams we've ever seen.
Yeah, the Pistons, I forget their franchise record for wins, but they're off to their
right
best
now
start.
while we're talking.
Yeah, they're off to their best start since 2005-6. And obviously that was a true championship.
That might have been it when they won 64. Yeah, that was it. They won 64 games.
So this is their best start since then.
The Pistons, yes, so the entire history of the Pistons, they've won 60 games twice. So, I would say to fans, if the Pistons wind up in the mid 50s in wins, they've done that in their entire 78-year history of the franchise. They've done that, I believe, doing quick math, 14 times, winning 50 games. So you're already talking about one of the top 20% of the teams in the history of the franchise. And this is the team that's made several NBA finals and has won 3 titles and has had some iconic teams. So yeah, all that's to say, it shouldn't be taken as an insult. And I think it's just good to remember that this is still a young team that's in the growth stage. And, this beginning has been awesome, and I think it sets up for a really fascinating spring ahead in Detroit. And I think we're going to finally see the playoff drought break, which would be great. But I'm not quite sure I'm ready to say they're going to be that good.
Yeah, so speaking of that, our guy Kyle says that they keep playing this well with Ivy back in the fold. I think the likelihood of them taking a swing goes way down. Another commenter, hear me out, minority opinion, don't trade anyone. I guess to all of that, Bontemps, like, what do you think? And listen, we still have a large sample of games left. Ivy just came back. I thought he looked good, but it was his first game back. Still trying to incorporate everybody. If I told you had to make a decision on what they do at the deadline based on the data you have right now, is it big swing, small swing, or no swing at all for this team at the deadline?
So I would say it's a little hard to say directly like they should do swing A, B, or C, right? Because it's sort of hard to know what's going to come down the pipe. Like, we certainly didn't know last year that that Luka Doncic was going to get traded at the deadline. If something like that comes along, Detroit can add some top 5 or 6 player in the league to their team. Okay, sure. Like, maybe they do that. I would say, though, that if I had to guess, I would guess there's going to be something smaller, if anything. If for no other reason than if I'm just, on the Who Collective, we say actions over words, right? And the actions of Trajan Langdon, since he's gotten in the job, has all been geared toward allowing this young core to develop and grow. And so I think if they can find pieces to continue to allow that to happen, I think they'll continue to keep doing that. But I'd be surprised if they trade, I don't know, they trade all their picks for somebody, or they do something really drastic. Like, I would guess it's going to be more of a slow burn. Let this grow, let it see where it goes. And then maybe there's a move to be made to upgrade something marginal, like if you use, like, say, this year's first round pick and stuff, and not anything beyond that. Try to get better this year to give yourself a chance to make a deeper run, and then go from there. But like you said, we're still 2.5 months from the trade deadline. There's a lot of time left in the season. There's a lot of things left to get sorted out. And there's also the fact that you're looking at a team that's got, a couple guys who are going to be up for big contract extensions next summer. Depending on what you do with Jaden Ivey, I certainly think it's much more likely, no matter what, that Jalen Duren is on the team. Asar Thompson's up the year after that. So, like, there are some decisions you have to make on that front that I think also play a role in when you're planning out whether this team should make a move or not. Some of it also has to account for just how much more expensive they're going to get and the choices you're going to have to make at that point. And that makes it a little harder to take a big swing on a big salary now, unless you're really certain it's somebody you want to have as part of your core going forward.
So that probably means when you start foreseeing to, like you said, a lot to play out, but the idea of, selling the farm for a guy like Lauri Markkanen probably becomes a little bit less compelling. You mentioned like top 5, top 6 guy. That's, everything is caving in for Milwaukee, so now you're talking about Giannis or something like that.
Yeah, I just think in general, fans, media, even some teams have not really accounted for how difficult it's going to be in general to trade high salary players going forward. And, obviously I just got done saying nobody could see the Luka Doncic trade coming. So, like, it only takes one team or two teams to make a trade that people are surprised about. But there's obviously a lot of big name players that are either, in a bit disgruntled in their current situations or making a lot of money, who are big names, who are talked about as possible trade candidates for places. And I just think in general, people are going to start to figure out that there's not a ton of appetite for any of them in the open market from a trade standpoint due to a combination of both there not being a lot of picks out there to trade, period, and teams are operating in a much different space in terms of wanting to take on long-term future money because of all the new rules and restrictions. And, if you're a team like Detroit, and if you want to pay all 5 of those guys, and I certainly think there's an open question as to whether that's actually going to be the case, but if you want to pay 5 players, you look at the Knicks, you look at the Cavs, like that's your team. You don't have any other players then, right? So I think it's going to be interesting to see over the next 12 to 24 to 36 months as these, as the new rules really sink in and people really get their heads around them, are we going to see more contracts like the one Naz Reid signed in Minnesota? I don't know. Maybe not. I think you're more likely to see teams losing players because they can't afford to have 6 guys making $25 million on their team or $30 million on their team. Or if you have 2 or 3 guys making the max, you can only have so many other guys. So probably sounds like a cop-out answer to fans who just want to know if they're going to make a big swing on a trade or not. But I just do think in general, that is something I'm very attuned to and curious about across the league is I think the idea of trading big name players on big salary contracts, I think it's going to be a lot harder than people think, and it's probably going to be for less of a return than people think. And I would point to the Kevin Durant trade in June as a very good example of that, where if you'd said Kevin Durant was going to get traded for, the 10th pick in the draft and 2, one starter and Dylan Brooks and one guy that's maybe a starter and Jalen Green, who both make a good amount of money, doesn't sound like a whole lot for Kevin Durant. But that was also more or less what the market was for Kevin Durant. And that's Kevin Durant, who even at this age of his career is still awfully good. So that I think is going to be an undercurrent of the market that we're going to see play out both for the next few months and maybe the next few years.
So I guess a little bit more to just like staying on this year and what level of success the Pistons can have. What would be your biggest worry about this team? Like I'm not worried about, asking how many wins are they going to have in the regular season.
Right.
Like, if we want them to have success in the playoffs in 25-26, what is your biggest worry? This is a team 28th in 3-point attempt rate and 18th in percentage, where the only like real big time shooter is Duncan Robinson. They're 2nd in defensive rating right now. But is there a hole there somewhere? Is there a ball handling issue? Like if you look, these are just raw numbers, but Dennis Jenkins is 2nd on the team in assists per game behind Cade's almost 10. When you watch Detroit play and you project out a playoff setting, is there something that stands out to you that maybe worries you or you think could be taken advantage of?
Yeah, I think you guys watch the team a lot. I think you hit the nail on the head. Like this is not a very good. I know they're ranked ninth in offense, but this is not a very good offensive team in general. Again, when you're comparing them to the elite teams in the league, they're not an elite offensive team. And when they get in the playoffs, I do think that is something that's going to be a concern. And they're a pretty good defensive or offensive rebounding team, I should say. They're 6th in the league in offensive rebounding. We've seen that become more and more in vogue, and with the size they have, that's a real weapon for them. But yeah, like Cade's got to be more efficient overall, and they've got to, I would say if they're looking to add to this team, you'd want to find a guy that is going to be able to give you some more consistent scoring punch when you get into those situations. Now, maybe Jaden Ivey could stay healthy and grow into that kind of player. Maybe if they have Tobias Harris and Ivey and Karis LeVert all healthy, maybe that's enough. Maybe Cade continues to take a step forward. Maybe Ron Holland and Nassar Thompson get better as the year goes. Like there's all these different ways where they could fill in some of those gaps as the year goes on. But I think if you look at Detroit and say, what's the thing that's going to end up costing the Pistons in a series sometime in the spring, it's probably going to be they're going to run into a team, whether it's the Knicks or the Cavs or the Heat or whoever, that is able to dial it up to 130, 135 in games, even in the playoffs, the way the league is played now. And they just really can't keep up from a shooting standpoint and a scoring standpoint, despite the physicality that they have and the defense that they have. Not to say that they can't, not to say that they won't win, turning it into a physical battle and just out physical teams. But I think it's pretty obvious that if they have an Achilles heel, it's, set outside of Cade. And you kind of saw it in that Washington game. I know they had some people out, but at least to my eyes, I don't know what you guys thought. You watch the Pistons closer than I do. It certainly felt like everybody on the team was like, we need Cade to shoot the ball. Right. And I know plenty of guys were out, but it was like, well, let's just give Cade the ball. And even though he's falling over, that's our best option. And until that starts to change, I think they're probably going to be falling short of where they eventually hope to get to, because we've just never, it doesn't matter how good the one guy is. You need more than one guy in those spots. And Cade is awesome, but you need more than that late in the playoffs, because teams will just load up on Cade and dare other guys to beat him. And that's where you need the other guy, whoever the other guy is, whether it's one of these guys internally or that ends up being the piece they try to go find to be that guy, to be the sidekick to Cade offensively, to fully lift this team into true contender stats.
So two teams that kind of fit the same parameters the Pistons are now. Young team, rough defensive style. Last year, you look at the Houston Rockets and the Orlando Magic, who I think both had the same issue in the playoffs, where they just couldn't buy a bucket when they needed a bucket. And then both teams, you mentioned Houston, but they both kind of have the same offseason plan of consolidating and trying to fix that issue. And obviously Houston gets Kevin Durant, and then Orlando gets Desmond Bane. Do you see any parallels with them and the Pistons if it's not Duran or J.I. who's that second guy in the playoffs? Do you see parallels between where those teams were and where the Pistons are now?
I do see parallels with Orlando in particular, I think. Just based off, obviously they're both in the East. They're both bigger physical teams across the board. They both have size everywhere positionally, right? Like Jalen Suggs isn't as big as Cade Cunningham, but he's a big physical point guard. Desmond Bane is not 6'8", but he's a physical, strong 2-guard. I do think there are parallels there. And both those teams did go out and get Kevin Durant and Desmond Bane, right? Like they went out and addressed that need in the summer after they tried it in the playoffs and they fell short in the first round. Now, I see in the chat, you guys are talking about Jalen Duren. I'll just answer the question on Jalen Duren.
Yeah.
Jalen's having a great year. Jalen Duren can't, in my opinion, be your second scorer in the playoffs. Like, he's just not wired like that, really, in my opinion, right? Like, the fact he's scoring 20 a game is awesome, and him dominating the boards is awesome, and his improvement defensively is great, but you need a second perimeter scorer in the playoffs, in my opinion. And like last year, my question all year about the Thunder was Jalen Williams good enough to be the second guy in the playoffs, right? They had Shea. They had this shooting around Shea, but you have to have another guy. And the year before, they get in the playoffs, and what happens in the second round? Jalen Williams was awful, right? Had a bad series. They missed a ton of shots they could have made against Dallas. They lose to Dallas. And that was the whole question last year. Is Jalen Williams going to be good enough? Jalen Williams is going for 40 in finals games with a busted wrist, right? Jalen Williams is obviously good enough. Now, the Thunder might be a dynasty, so it's a little hard to say, are you going to be the Thunder? But if you look at where the Pistons are right now, there is no Jalen Williams on the team. And like that, whether Cade is obviously not quite Shea, but he's really good. But the question now to me is, you've got Duren and Isaiah Stewart inside. You've got Ron Holland and Sar Thompson that are very interesting. It's a very interesting wing combo going forward. Two athletic, long guys can really guard. Like, you've got an identity as a group. But the question is now, can you find that second guy who's a guy who can really go get you buckets in a playoff series? And is that Jaden Ivey? Is that, is a combination of him and Karis LeVert and Tobias Harris enough? Do you have to eventually go try to find a guy that sort of fits that bill on the team? That, I think, is the real question. And again, it's no knock on Duren, who has been very good, but I just think it's hard with his skill set to say that's going to be your second scorer in the playoffs. So just if you look over the history of the league, especially a history of the recent league, a center like Jalen Duren is not really typically the guy that can fill that role for as good as he is and as productive as he's been so far this year.
I guess that was kind of the crux of my question earlier, Bontemps. So for you then, would you be more interested in finding out these answers as opposed to going out and acquiring it? Like, or would you be more interested in seeing, I agree with you in general that the archetype of Jalen Duren isn't normally your number 2 option. Jaden Ivey hasn't either had the opportunity or been able to sustain being that number 2 option. Obviously, we didn't get to see him in the playoffs last year. Would you be more interested in getting the data collection from these guys, even if it means maybe coming up short, than you would in either taking a swing on a Lauri Markkanen or Trey Murphy, not even saying those guys would be available, or even a shorter term version of that? I'll throw out Zach LaVine just as an example. I'm not, saying that they should do something like that, but there's an argument of like, hey, go get LaVine just to do it for a couple of years. Which would you be more interested in seeing if you were Trajan in terms of data collection or whatever?
I would say that it's hard for me to see any world where Detroit is truly good enough to win this year.
Okay.
Like, if we're being honest, right? Like, sure, I guess if Luka appears and winds up on the team, then yes, if you have Luka and Cade, you could win. But like, for as great as the Pistons have been, and they've been great, like, I truly think the Thunder could win 74, 75 games. I think they've got a chance to be a dynastic team. So, and Denver still has this Nikola Jokic guy who is awesome. So like, if something happens to Oklahoma City, you're probably seeing Denver in the finals. I don't think Detroit is beating Nikola Jokic in a series this year. So, and again, like we talked about before, this is a team built around a 24-year-old star with all these guys around him who are younger than that. There's a lot of time, even in the NBA, the current NBA, where there's not a lot of time generally. There's a lot of time here. So to go back to what we were talking about earlier with these big money contracts and what happens when you take on guys like that and the choices it forces you into, again, it's very hard to say in a vacuum, this is exactly what the Pistons should do, like, because it's hard to know what opportunities are going to come down the pipe for them over the next couple of months. But I think just, again, based off how Trajan Langdon has operated in the job, I would think he's going to take a long-term approach. And I think it's pretty hard to argue with taking a long-term approach. Now, again, a long-term approach could mean you can find a guy that is some sort of a short-term addition that might help you in this area, and maybe it helps you get to the finals this year, right? Like, I think that would make sense if you could do that. But, saying damn the torpedoes and blowing all your draft picks on somebody that you're not certain is going to get you to that level right now, I just don't think makes a lot of sense based off of where the Pistons are sitting and the team they have going forward, and the fact that this isn't a Toronto Raptors with Kawhi situation, or, you're not the Warriors with Steph Curry and you have a couple years left. Like, in theory, this could be another 8 years like this or 9 years like this. Like, it's got a chance to be a really long, fun run. So I think with the uncertainty in the East, with how wide open it is, I think we would all agree, real questions about some of these things with these younger players, like, not to try to be negative, but there is a world where Ron Holland plateaus and Asar Thompson doesn't learn how to shoot, and Jalen Duren is averaging 20 points early in the year, but he settles back in as like a 15 or 16 a game guy. And then, like, there's still a very interesting team, but like the whole picture looks a little different then. And then maybe you have to adjust things, right? So all that's to say, I think for as fun as the beginning of the season has been and as great as the team has played, I would argue it gives you probably more latitude to just let it play out, let it see how things go. Because again, you've got the Knicks who are banging up against the second apron and are going to struggle to keep their team together longer term. They're also older, and that they've got to deal with all that. You've got the Cavs who are well into the second apron, and despite the fact that Dan Gilbert has plenty of money, he's willing to spend it, it's just hard to live in that space for a long time when you can't add to the roster and you can't improve the team and we've already seen them dealing with injuries on their roster. Like, it's just hard to be in that space for a long time. And then the rest of the teams in the East all have a lot of questions. And there isn't another team that's coming flying up behind the Detroit where you say, well, that team's got 2 or 3 studs, and it's going to be Detroit and somebody. So I would say right now, if you're projecting out for the next 5 years, Detroit's got as good a chance as anybody to be right at the top of the East for a long time. So if you look at it that way, I think it behooves you to take the wider lens, give Jaden Ivey every chance to see what he can do. You have to make a decision on him next summer anyway. If you've decided you don't want to pay him, which I think is a reasonable thing to decide, given you, again, have to make choices and you can't pay everybody, maybe you use him to get some other piece that fills this gap for now. But yeah, I would say it's either a short-term move. Like, I don't know if Zach is a perfect fit, but somebody like that, that's on a short-term contract that maybe could step in and try to be that guy for you right now. And you think, all right, in a couple of years, he'll cycle out and we'll have to find a longer-term fix and probably isn't going to cost us very much in terms of draft capital or anything. Or you just let it roll with this group, see how it is, and then make your decisions on, you know, what you're giving Ivy and Duren next summer and what your extension offer is for Asar Thompson, and figuring out what your salary structure is going forward, and then deciding what you got to do from there.
We could stay on that topic right there on Duren. And I think he's sort of an interesting evaluation just from what that next deal could look like. Like you say, he's a 20-10 guy right now. The defense has improved. You know, he's been one of the best bigs in the league through the first 15-ish games of the season. You know, you also mentioned, what does that ceiling look like in the playoffs? How much does that play style translate in those high leverage situations where you need elite shot making? How do you value a player like that? You know, I feel like centers have kind of just been in this weird space of, different teams value different, aspects of their skill sets differently. But I thought in the playoffs, it was undeniable that just Duren's raw productivity, I thought did a lot for them in the playoffs. And then this season as well, just everything he does, he just kind of overwhelms teams. How do you value a guy like that, where obviously there's still some limitations on, how he's going to do defensively in the perimeter and things like that as well?
It's a fascinating question. And I think it's really going to be interesting to see what those negotiations look like. Because, look, Jalen Duren's had a great year, right? He's had a really great year. He's made meaningful strides forward. He's played awesome. On the other hand, and I'm not saying he is this guy, so I want to preface this by saying this now so people don't get mad at me. DeAndre Ayton had an incredible run in 21 and helped get the Suns to the NBA Finals, right? In that offseason, there was a lot of discussion about should they give DeAndre Ayton the max. And he ended up not extending for the max. He ends up signing an offer sheet the next summer, and then he just got waived off that contract this year. Now, I don't think Jalen Duren is DeAndre Ayton. So I don't want Pistons fans to go crazy on me for saying that. But I do think that you're talking about a center who is not a shooter, really. He's a pretty interesting passer, but not necessarily a hubby or offense guy. He's not Rudy Gobert on defense. He's a good defensive center now, but I think you guys would probably agree he's not a defensive player of the year candidate, really, right?
He's not an anchor of your defense. Like Isaiah Stewart's more than
Isaiah.
That, than
right.
Duren.
Isaiah Stewart's a better defensive center, right? Jalen Duren's a better player, but Isaiah Stewart's a better defensive center. So all of that's to say, how much can you afford to pay Jalen Duren when you're trying to build out the best possible team? And I don't think it's a good idea to pay Jalen Duren a max next summer, even if he makes the All-Star team and the Pistons make the finals, right? And there'll probably be pressure to do that. And I'm not saying you let Jalen Duren walk if that's what the price is either. But I think if you look at, we talked about the Kevin Durant trade earlier, right? If you look at Houston didn't pay Alperen Şengün the max. They have done a great job of managing their contracts across the board. They didn't give Kevin Durant an auto max when they made this trade. They signed him for less. They got Fred VanVleet on a good contract. They've done a great job managing their salary cap And so that's allowed them to have a really deep team. And I think going forward, to go back again to some of the big picture stuff we've talked about, I think the goal for NBA teams going forward has to be to figure out a way to have 8 really good players on your team. Because if you can have 8 guys, that to me is a real separator when you get to the later stages of the playoffs. Like, you look at the Knicks last year. The Knicks had like 6 or 7 guys. Like, people yelled at Tom Thibodeau to play guys at the end of the bench, but like, they didn't have 9 clear options for him to play. They just didn't. They had 6 or 7, right? The Cavs were a top-heavy team. The Denver Nuggets are a very top-heavy team. Like, that led to all the changes that happened there last year, right? They couldn't figure out enough bench play around Jokic to be good enough to hang in there with the Thunder. Like, to me, that if you can figure out a way to manage your books and have 7, probably even 8 to 9 good to very good players on your team, when you have a stud like Cade, for sure, leading the way, that is, to me, the formula that's going to be what's required to both navigate a season where we know the wear and tear on guys, you have to have enough depth to get through the season, and also to be able to play the different styles necessary to get through the playoffs, to get to the finals, to be a true championship contending team. Like, look at Oklahoma City. Again, like that's obviously the star everybody's shooting for, right? They've got 12 guys. Like, Jalen Williams hasn't played 1 second this season, and they're 16-1. And they were up 20 today on Portland, up 25 on Portland in the fourth quarter. They're going to be 17-1, and their all-NBA forward has not played 1 second. So, like, because they've got Alex Caruso and Aaron Wiggins and Isaiah Joe and Isaiah Hartenstein and Lou Dort and Cason Wallace and AJ Mitchell. And like, they've just got an insane amount of guys. Now, everybody's not the Thunder. I get that. But if you're trying to beat the Thunder, you've got to be able to go toe to toe with the Thunder. And that comes down to, how do you fit all these guys in this new salary structure? And like, you could auto max Jalen Duren next summer if he makes an all-star team this year and he's a borderline All-NBA or All-NBA player and the Pistons make the conference finals. Like, nobody would say that's a horrible contract at that point, right? Like, he had a great year. But if you do that, it's going to cost you 1 or more players down the road. And so that's where I think the job gets really hard for Trajan Langdon and for the Pistons front office. And I think as we go forward across the league, not just in Detroit, like, unless you've got a super duper star guy like Cade, you max Cade. You make sure here's your franchise guy, you have him there. Everybody else, you've got to be really disciplined, I think, in how you negotiate on every contract, because the extra $5 million could be the difference between keeping a critical piece or losing somebody. Like, maybe in 2 years, you can't have Isaiah Stewart on the team, and maybe you can't re-sign Ron Holland, or you can't keep Jaden Ivey, or you can't, say Dennis Jenkins becomes a legitimate 7th guy. I mean, he's been a hell of a success story so far. Like, maybe you can't keep him. Like, maybe you end up with a 5-man rotation and you are struggling to fill out the bench. And all that sounds like I'm banging on Jalen Duren, which he's been awesome. And I love watching him play. And the way, like I said, it's amazing watching guys just bounce off him. Like, he's been incredible and his growth has been awesome. But I do think that just across the board, teams have to be extraordinarily disciplined on how they negotiate this stuff going forward. And I think you're going to see with a team like Detroit with a bunch of high draft picks, one after the other, like, these are the kind of conversations and the kind of choices you're going to have to make. And if you look at like Atlanta, now Atlanta doesn't have quite a Cade on the team, but like the Jalen Johnson contract they have him on of 5 years at $30 million a year, that's going to become one of the best contracts in the league. Like, that's getting him on that extension could be the difference between them keeping Nickeil Alexander-Walker in 2 years or losing. It's part of why they're able to sign Nickeil Alexander-Walker this summer, who's an awesome player and a great fit for them. So I know fans don't want to hear about owners spending money. I'm not really trying to make this about owners spending money, but when you have a team that's got this kind of potential and is this good and is starting to head in this direction, to me, the whole job of the front office now is to really start planning out, okay, if we give Jalen Duren $25 million a year, $30 million a year, $35 million a year, $40 million a year, what does that mean for the different choices we have to make with the roster? And then how do we counteract that to have as good a team as we want to have? It's part of the good challenges of having a really exciting young team. And it's, I think the Jalen Duren question, especially if he keeps playing like this, is going to be one of the more interesting questions in the league next summer, because I don't know how many teams are going to be rushing to give him a huge offer sheet, because there are not. It's kind of like point guard, center. Just about every team has at least one good one. So who's going to value him at that level? And conversely, can Detroit get him at a number where he's going to feel happy and everybody's going to be in a good position, and you could still have the salary flexibility to keep all these other guys? It's a really interesting thing. And, my understanding was he wanted somewhere in the neighborhood of $30 million or more in an extension. Didn't really get close to getting done. It's my understanding. I was with the Pistons on that, and he's come out and played out of his mind, which is fantastic. If you're the Pistons, that's exactly what you want. But, ultimately all these things are very good conversations to be having. And what it means is, even if fans are annoyed to hear it, it's that your team is ascending and exciting and on a good path. And this is the kind of stuff that even Oklahoma City is going to have to decide over the next year and a half with Lou Dort and Isaiah Hartenstein and Cason Wallace and all these really good players they have. Like, they can't keep all their players. So that somebody just put that up there. How do they keep them? They don't. They're not going to keep all their guys. Like, they're going to have to make choices. Everybody's going to have to make choices. So that, that's where I think the teams that do a really good job negotiating these contracts, as boring as that is, and it's not, throwing all the picks at a big star trade, that I think is going to be the real separator. And I think you've already seen it with Atlanta and Houston. They put themselves in really good situations because they've negotiated good contracts. And I think early on, like, Trajan's done a really nice job getting vets on short-term deals that make sense, that giving them a lot of flexibility. But the rubber's going to hit the road on Jalen, on Asar, on Ron, on Jaden Ivey. Like, those extension decisions and where they land and what they decide to do, that's going to be the thing that determines what the course of this group is going forward. And then, what moves they have to make to try to make it work around it.
All right. I know we got to get you out of here, but I want to, one little thing on this.
I still got time. We're good.
Okay.
We're good.
And then a fun question that somebody dropped as well. So our guy, YouTube user, says, I think this is interesting perspective that you can probably give better than, for sure, me, maybe even Omari. Says Duren is a restricted free agent. Let someone sign him to an offer sheet, then decide before overpaying. My real question here is, Bontemps, is this feasible for a team to do? Or do you risk, like, to be quite frank, just pissing Jalen Duren off to the point where you get in a situation where chemistry is a great thing for this team right now. The vibes are a great thing for this team right now. Does this potentially disrupt that if you let it play out this way, specifically? I
think I would say in general, like, that's a great question. Like, is that the best way to handle it? It's kind of like the trade thing. And it's going to sound like a cop-out. I don't know if necessarily the answer is, well, just have them go find an offer, right? But to me, it is really hard. Like, to your point, Bryce, it's really, really hard to have these negotiations and have everybody feel good. Like, even for like us and average people, like, going through life, like, any kind of salary negotiation for anybody is hard. Everybody wants to make more money. Everybody wants to advance. Everybody wants to have more. And it's, sometimes they go really well and everybody's treated fairly and it ends really well. Sometimes you come out of it and you feel miserable and you feel like you were treated poorly and you're not happy and you don't feel valued. And that's where, to me, the whole job of being a lead executive with a team really comes down to managing the room. Like, for Trajan Langdon, that's managing Tom Gores, that's managing JB Bickerstaff, that's managing the relationships with the players. That's not like, I don't mean that in like a babysitting sense. But I mean, like, it's his job to sit down with Jalen Duren and Jalen Duren's agents, but really with Jalen Duren, and be like, look, we've got to try to plan things out as best we can for the long term. You've been an unbelievable fit here. We want to have you here. This is what we think we can do. Can we get a number that works? If we can't, you want to find something better elsewhere? Like, we get it, but we're not going to have you leave. We want you to be here. Let's figure out a number that makes sense for everybody. And like, I think if you come at it in a way where, I think there's a way to do it where you could come out of it feeling good about where it lands, but it's not easy to do. And there's been plenty of times where these have gone sour, and it has really soured things. Like, there's plenty of examples of that in pro sports across the board. So I do think that is a real challenge that the Pistons are going to have to navigate. But again, in this new reality that we're in, where you have this second apron and you have, again, it's not about how much money is Tom Gores willing to spend. Like, Tom Gores is willing to spend money. I don't think it's an issue of like paying luxury tax, but it's, you can't put players together in trades. You can't use the exceptions. You can't really improve your team at all. Like, you are very limited in what you can do with your roster, on top of the fact that it's extraordinarily expensive year over year. And so you do have to make choices, and you do have to be really prudent and think about, is this the right number that we can fit everybody in with? And like I said, a lot of it comes back to the Pistons have a lot of good, young, exciting players. Like, it's a fun problem to have. But like I said, Oklahoma City's not keeping everybody. So they're gonna lose players. And, like, Detroit is going to have to make decisions on whether they can either get everybody on a good number, or they're going to lose players, or they're going to have to turn players into other guys. And that's the kind of calculus that I think every team is going to have to make going forward. And it's why, to go all the way back to the big salary, big name player thing, I think there is going to be a bit of a rude awakening for, I think, fans, especially when they're like, hey, let's go in the trade machine and put, Anthony Davis. Like my buddy Tim McMahon reported last week about Anthony Davis, right? Put Anthony Davis on 20 different teams. Well, he's owed 54 this year, 58 next year. He's got a $62 million player option the year after that. Like, if you're trading for Anthony Davis, so forget about whether you extend him or not. You've still got to account for paying him and having him in your salary structure for the next 3 years, this year and 2 more. Like, that's a huge number. That's what, 20 million more, I think, than Cade Cunningham is making right now.
About that, yeah.
So like, yeah. So like, I mean, if I'm just pulling up my salary sheet. So his 54 million is the same as Duncan Robinson, Isaiah Stewart, Karis LeVert, Jaden Ivey, and Asar Thompson, basically all together. That's the cost of Anthony Davis this year, right? So like, if you can't just put him on the team and go, oh yeah, we got AD, this is great. Like, let's turn off the salary rules in 2K and force the trade through. Like, doesn't work like that. So I do think that not just in Detroit, but for a lot of teams around the league, like, this is the kind of conversation and the kind of question that I think any good team and any well-run team is going to be having now, is like, what do we do with these decisions? And I keep pointing out Houston because I think Rafael Stone has done a great job, but like, the Kevin Durant trade is a perfect example. Like, Kevin Durant got traded for 1 lottery pick, Jalen Green, and Dylan Brooks. Like, if I told you guys a year ago Kevin Durant was getting traded for Jalen Green, Dylan Brooks, and the 10th pick in the draft, you guys would have been like, what? Really?
And signed for less than the max, right? Got extended for less than the max.
And that's right. And didn't show up and get all the money. Like, they said, we're going to figure out what happened with Tari Eason first. We're going to get these other guys done, and then we're going to get you done. Like, Kevin Durant's just not walking in and getting $60 million a year. But again, like, that's why Houston has a really deep, really good team, because they've been diligent about every one of these negotiations. And that, I think, like, Trajan Langdon in his first couple years on the job has done, I think, a great job and has been patient and has let these guys grow and went and, the hiring JB Bickerstaff was great. Like, everything about this has been charmed life so far. But when you're playing well like this and you're having this kind of success, it then leads to, all right, we've got to start to make some real decisions. And life comes at you fast in the NBA. And that's not to say that the Pistons are going to go off a cliff. Like we said earlier, I think they're going to be as good as anybody in the East for the rest of this decade because they've got a really good young core and they've got a flat out stud in Cade Cunningham to line up behind for the next few years and beyond. So like he's the kind of guy everybody is tanking in the draft and being bad to get. So like that alone should make you really excited about where things are headed. But the decisions that are made now are the ones that will probably determine whether the Pistons can have a run like they did in the 2000s, where they were in the conference finals 6 years in a row and made the finals 3 times, right? I think.
Yeah, they made the finals twice.
That's right. They didn't make it a third time, but they obviously made the conference finals 6 years in a row. We're an awesome team, iconic group. Or it's going to be a team like, say, what the Bucks were the last several years, right? And like, obviously, you take one title for sure, but like the Bucks won the title in 21 and haven't made it back to the conference finals again. And part of that is because of the way they manage the roster around Giannis. Some of it's bad luck. Some of it's also that, you know, they made some decisions that weren't great and they haven't had enough horses to really get all the way to the end. And, you know, like those are really fun conversations to be in and like to be thinking about how can this team be a consistent conference finals team again? But, you know, these are the things that, like I could promise you, Sam Presti in 2022 was thinking about what the Thunder salary sheet would look like in 2027. And like, you know, as soon as Jalen Williams and Chet Holmgren were taken off, it's like, okay, how are we going to navigate this to where we have these 3 guys and we have enough around these 3 guys to be good enough? So that's what the good teams are trying to do.
And to that point, he negotiated. I've obviously listened to you. You talk all the time about negotiating. Even their rookie extensions didn't have the full percentage language. Yep. Like J-Dub's not going to get it anyway because he's already missed too many games.
Yep.
But
Chet didn't get any at all. It was just 20. I mean, he might add a slight thing for something, but
J-Dub's was like third team was this much, second team was this much for like those were millions of dollar decisions though on the percentages that if those guys would make it were the difference in Aaron Wiggins being on the team or Aaron Wiggins not being on the team.
Or Cason Wallace or Lou Dort or Isaiah Hartenstein or multiple of those guys, right? Like that, like that's the thing you really, that's where those are the margins where differences are made. Like look at Denver, automaxed Michael Porter Jr. and Jamal Murray. And the last few years, they've had to dance around the aprons or the tax because those guys were probably making, let's say, $15 million combined, you know, $7-8 million each more than they should have, maybe more, right? $15 million is another really good player. Like that might be the difference between Denver having 3 titles in a row or what they have, you know, like, again, this sounds boring. It sounds like, oh, you're just trying to keep money away from players or whatever. But like, if in your basic, the NBA is more or less, you'll probably be mad at me saying this, but like, it's more or less a hard cap system. And you've got, you know, a couple teams that are going to be in the second apron every year, and everybody else is going to be trying to stay below it. And that means you have finite resources to build your team. And so, you know, like I said, what Detroit decides to do with Jalen Duren and Jaden Ivey and Asar Thompson and Ron Holland the next 3 years is going to be massively important. And the choices they make on those guys and the amount of money they get, like I said, it's going to determine whether you can afford to keep Dennis Jenkins, whether you can afford to keep Isaiah Stewart, whether you can afford to keep Karis LeVert, or you can afford to go trade for a guy to be the upgrade that you need. Like, you know, OKC had the ability to go get Alex Caruso and Isaiah Hartenstein. Maybe this team can find that veteran piece to fill in either through trade or free agency to be that guy that gets them over the hump. But you've got to be able to position yourself to financially survive in this new reality. And that means that, to go back to your original question, Bryce, like sometimes these negotiations can get tricky, and it's the front office's job to try to do it in a way where you're fair to everybody and you explain what's going on. And when you get to the other side of it, you make sure everybody's feeling good and you keep the train rolling. And if you can, like, you know, life's pretty good in Houston. Life's pretty good in Oklahoma City. Like, life's pretty good in Atlanta. Like, it's early days in Atlanta, especially, but like, you know, Houston, like Alperen Şengün easily could have got the max, and many places would have given him the max. He made the All-Star team, I believe, the year before, and he's a terrific young player. And he got signed for not way less, but less. And that contract's a huge value now. And like, again, those margins are what's going to really determine how deep your team can be. And I think especially with the way the league is now, the deeper you can be, it's just going to be such a differentiator over the 82 and even over the 16 to be able to hold up and keep up with the physical demands of playing. And I think we've already seen it. The older teams are really struggling, and the teams without much depth are really struggling, for the most part, unless you have Nikola Jokic, struggling. And so if you're going to lean into that model, okay, you're paying Cade a 30% max. Now you got to figure out how you're going to build a team around him, and that requires some hard decisions to be made.
Well, I think the fact that we're getting to talk about that and not trying to break a 28-game losing streak anymore is pretty good.
Well, and that's what I would say to any fans who are annoyed hearing all this. Be like, man, why are you like talking about what sounds like depressing stuff? That's what I would say. I'd be like, this season's been super fun. I've watched a ton of Pistons games. It's been great to watch. And these are the kind of conversations, even though they're not like thrilling to have. Having these conversations means your team matters. And you're not like, well, none of these young guys are any good and we have to start over again with another whole rebuild, right? Like, this isn't, the dog days of the 2010s for the Pistons. This is a team that's going to be good for a long time and exciting. And, we're going to be talking about them for, like I said, for probably the rest of this decade.
Yeah. This is a combo that's jarring for some fans because, again, we lived in the draft world, is there anybody worth paying world for so long. And this conversation is the conversation that teams like Boston, Denver, Milwaukee, they've been in this world for a while. Like Boston had to trade everybody this past offseason because literally they just exhausted.
Yeah, they were going to be a $500 million team. Like if they'd won the title, maybe they would have done that for 1 year. But like, they weren't going to live in that space forever. Like that wasn't even because the draft pick stuff. It was because they were going to cost $500 million. Like, can't afford to be a $500 million team.
Yeah, and other teams have been in this space. So the Pistons just getting here, fans need to realize that these conversations are only going to become more frequent as we get closer to restricted free agency, as the Pistons continue to win and they get into that next plateau of, okay, they're actually contending. Every other good team has lived in this space for a while. So these conversations are just starting for the Pistons, but this is a preview of what it's going to be for a while.
All right, Bontemps, you've been here far too long, but I want to ask the question that has the highest chance of you getting aggregated. And quite frankly, having just met you and hopefully not the last time I get to talk with you, I hope you get aggregated with this one. Sean from Half Court, great Pistons content creator and beat writer himself. Tim, if you had to survive on a deserted island with a Hoop Collective member, who would it be and why?
This is very easy. Our producer Jackson, for sure. He's 27. He's incredibly resourceful. He's not old like my co-hosts are. I love those guys, but yeah, if I'm trying to survive out there, I need somebody young because I'm not young either. So
found a loop.
I'm going with Jackson.
He found a loophole in the question, and I'm so.
Well, if I'm out there with McMahon, McMahon and Brian, I can't handle basic technology in our lives now. So if I'm out there with one of them, we're just cooked. So I gotta find somebody who can hopefully get me through. So
can they hunt and fish?
That's what I mean. Those guys are not. I grew up on a farm. I can handle myself a little bit, but those guys aren't doing any of that. So I'm going with Jackson. He's resourceful. They'll figure out a way to get us out of the mess that we're in. So
if you guys don't know, one, you should be listening. And
Jackson is our super producer on the podcast who, like Wes for you guys, is the guy making sure that he's the reason why our podcast even gets on the air, and he occasionally pops on, but he's great. So it's really a 4-person pod, even though he's kind of a silent partner, and I'm going with him for that answer for sure. But it's a great question, and it did make me laugh thinking about seeing seeing the big star window on a deserted island, not sure what to do. You'd just be looking around going, where are my servants? So
I love it. I love it. All right. Thank you so much, not only for joining us, but the amount of time you gave us this evening. We know you have to go record another pod, which, like I mentioned, I will be listening to in the morning. So before we let you go, for anybody who doesn't know where you're at, where they can find you, all of your work, I want to give you a chance to plug all of that stuff, please.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I mean, as you guys have been very kind to say, we do the Hoop Collective 3 times a week. McMahon and I are on either 3 days a week or on Mondays and Wednesdays. It'll be on Monday and Wednesday this week. Our Friendsgiving episode will be Wednesday with pretty much everybody on our staff, which is always fun. Yeah, and then all my work is at ESPN.com. Had a story run on Friday looking at all 30 teams in the league. Talked about Jalen Duren in it. And have some stuff coming this week too. But yeah, find my work there and listen to the collective and try not to have me break your TV. On SportsCenter.
Thank you again. O2, take it away, my guy.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. Always great to talk to you, Bontemps. Big thanks to our audio producer, Robin Chan, our editor-in-chief, Nicole Avery Nichols. A big shout out to Wes Davenport, as always. And we'll talk to you all next week.